Fairmont Crest always knows how to turn a milestone day into a stage so flawlessly polished that people forget every spotlight casts a shadow, and every blessing can hide a curse. Ted and Shanice's whirlwind wedding unfolded like a meticulously scripted scene. White flowers carpeting the aisle, soft music playing just loudly enough to lull the crowd, champagne flowing as if it could never run dry, and rehearsed smiles fixed on the faces of those who have long learned to live by reputation rather than emotion. Yet the very moment Ted slipped the ring onto Shanice's finger, a chill ran down the spine of the sharpest observer's not because joy was overwhelming, but because something that didn't belong to love was sitting quietly among the celebration. In the darkness behind the decorated light pillars, a server accidentally dropped a silver tray, the clatter of metal against the floor ringing out like an alarm bell. Elsewhere, Nicole's phone vibrated once and went dead, leaving behind a strange symbol on the screen, alongside the ceremony's exact time, as if someone was counting down. And Ted, the man standing at the center of his own life stage, didn't feel like he was being married at all, but as if he were being locked in place by a gleaming chain he willingly fastened, because he was terrified of what would happen if he ever tried to take it off. Ted married Shanice not purely out of love, but because he wanted to turn the marriage to a shield trapping himself inside a responsibility strong enough to sever every possible path back to Nicole. No one in Fairmont Crest understood Ted's weakness more clearly than Ted himself. He had once believed he was a man of principle, convinced that as long as he made the right decision, all chaotic emotions would simply disappear. But he was wrong. His love for Nicole never vanished. It only sank beneath the ash of their arguments, their suspicions, the bruises of pride neither of them was willing to kneel down and heal. And the most dangerous thing between them wasn't rage, it was the prolonged silence. That silence made Ted start imagining that, if he had just one weak night, one softened moment, he would go back, he would apologize. He would destroy everything he had built just to look like a strong man. Ted didn't want to be betrayed by himself again. He didn't want to become the kind of man who chased emotion like an addict, and then woke the next morning despising himself for losing control. So Shanice appeared like an escape route, not an escape of love, but an escape of running away. A marriage so fast no one had time to question. It was Ted's way of turning his choices into an irreversible done deal, forcing everyone, forcing Nicole, and forcing even himself to accept it. But Shanice wasn't a naive girl walking into this marriage with nothing but dreams in her eyes. She stepped in like someone who understood exactly what leverage was worth. On the surface, Shanice was youth, energy, the spark that made Ted look, if he'd been reborn, someone who offered him a version of life without a past, without the old wounds tied to Nicole. But beneath that surface, Shanice carried a secret dark enough to suffocate Ted's entire career. Ted sensed it from the moment Shanice started getting too close. She didn't need to say it outright, because truly dangerous people never have to threaten with words. A perfectly timed glance, a half-finished sentence, a photo that appeared on Ted's phone by accident, and then vanished, those were enough for him to understand that Shanice was holding something that could not only destroy him, but drag down the hospital, the professional ties he had spent a lifetime building. Ted didn't marry Shanice to be loved. He married her because he didn't dare let her walk away while she was holding a knife. The wedding became a silent contract. Shanice gained a title, a position, the right to enter any room in Ted's life without asking permission. And Ted, in exchange, received a temporary kind of safety, the kind a blackmailed man clings to, while convincing himself he still has a choice. If Ted walked down the aisle with a heart weighed down by stone, Shanice walked down with a hunger she refused to name. She didn't just want Ted, she wanted victory. She wanted all of Fairmont Crest to watch Nicole lose. She wanted to enter every party as the chosen woman, even if that choice reeked of fear and calculation. But what enraged Shanice most wasn't Nicole, and it wasn't the crowd. It was Ted himself, the man who married her while still leaving an empty space in his eyes for another woman. Shanice could feel it even when Ted smiled. His touch was always correct, his words always polished. but his warmth didn't belong to her. And to Shanice, that felt like humiliation. She refused to become armor for a man still dreaming of his ex. That was why the secret she held wasn't only meant to keep Ted by her side, it was meant to punish him every day, every hour, forcing him to pay for daring to treat her like a tool. Nicole, whom everyone believed had stepped out of the competition, was the only one who didn't enter the wedding in panic. Yes, Nicole was hurting. Yes, she felt insulted watching Ted marry a younger, more impulsive woman, as if the years Nicole had spent protecting their marriage were nothing but a replaceable object. But Nicole wasn't the kind of woman who collapsed in tears. She was the kind who, once pushed away from the table, returned by flipping the entire table over. The frightening thing about Nicole wasn't jealousy, it was cold control. She didn't strike immediately. She watched. She let Shanice taste a few hours of triumph. She let Ted lock himself deeper inside the shield he had built. And within that silence, Nicole prepared her counterattack like a precise surgery, not to win Ted back through love, but to make both Ted and Shanice understand they had made the fatal mistake of underestimating a woman who once stood at the peak of Fairmont Crest's power. Throughout the reception, Nicole kept her expression unnervingly calm. She shook hands, offered congratulations like a social ritual, and anyone watching closely could see her restraint wasn't the sign of letting go, it was the sign of a storm being compressed. It unsettled Ted in ways he didn't dare admit. He had married Shanice to block every road back to Nicole. Yet Nicole's quiet composure terrified him more than any screaming ever could. Ted understood Nicole. When Nicole was silent, it meant she was calculating, and Ted couldn't endure the feeling that he had become the target of a calculation he couldn't see an escape from. Right after the wedding, everything began slipping out of control in the cruelest way. Shanice entered the mansion as Mrs. Richardson and thought she had claimed a throne, but the place wasn't empty territory. Every corner carried Nicole's imprint, not a physical trace, but a psychological one. Old photographs, objects Nicole had once chosen, Ted's habits shaped by years of life. With Nicole, everything formed an invisible wall that made Shanice feel like an invader. She started breaking things, changing things, giving orders, as if the more she erased the past, the more she would be recognized. But the harder she tried, the more she faced the brutal truth that the past doesn't disappear simply because you hate it. And the more Ted stayed silent in the face of her destruction, the more Shanice felt punished by indifference. Ted wasn't at peace either. He began waking in the middle of the night with a choking sensation, as if someone's hand were pressing down on his chest. He wondered how far he had gone just to avoid Nicole. He wondered what kind of man he had become, marrying out of fear. But those questions were never allowed to live for long, because Shanice always knew how to drag him back to the ground with a casual reminder of the secret she still held. Ted hated Shanice for that. Yet he hated himself even more. His anger didn't erupt into open fury, it turned inward, into self-destruction, longer shifts, colder medical decisions, moments where he looked at patients like problems to solve, instead of human beings to save. Ted didn't realize he was becoming the very thing Nicole had always feared, a man losing compassion, because he was too busy protecting his image and his pride. The first shock hit like a slap in the face. During their honeymoon week, an anonymous post appeared inside Fairmont Crest's private groups, not directly accusing anything, but uploading a short video that captured Ted stepping out of a hotel room months ago, a moment he had believed buried forever. The clip wasn't clear enough to convict, but it was clear enough to raise questions. And in Fairmont Crest, a question was a weapon. Shanice saw the video before Ted did. She didn't cry. She didn't panic. She only felt blood rush to her head with a new humiliation. Ted wasn't just incapable of loving her, he might also be dirtier than she had imagined. She had used a secret to chain Ted. But now that secret was at risk of being exposed in a way she couldn't control. And when a manipulator loses control, they become extreme. Nicole saw the video too, and she instantly recognized it as the crack she had been waiting for. But she didn't rush in. She let Shanice spiral. She let Ted get cornered. She even pretended she knew nothing, continuing to appear at social events with a calmness that drove Shanice insane. Because Shanice wanted Nicole screaming, wanted her making a spectacle of herself, wanted her branded as the pathetic loser. But Nicole refused to give her that satisfaction. Nicole only left behind glances as sharp as knives, and that silence was the thing that truly killed. As Fairmont Crest started whispering about the wedding that smelled wrong, Ted received an unmarked envelope at the hospital. Inside was a copy of an old file bearing his signature, and a short note. "I know what you did, and I know who you married to bury it." Ted went rigid, as if ice water had been poured straight over him. The secret Shanice held was suddenly no longer theirs alone. There was a third party, someone in the shadows who understood the game well enough to deliver exactly what would keep Ted awake at night. And the most terrifying part was that Ted had no idea who it was. When the enemy is invisible, fear rots you from the inside out. Ted began suspecting Shanice had staged everything, but Shanice believed Ted was trying to pin the blame on her to escape the consequences. Both of them became trapped in a wordless war where every look was an accusation, every gesture a betrayal. Shanice tightened her grip, controlled Ted's schedule, demanded he appear beside her everywhere like a trophy. Ted felt more suffocated, more trapped inside a gilded cage, and he hated himself for missing Nicole in ways he didn't want to name. And Nicole, standing outside that cage, was the only one who could see the decay spreading. The second shock exploded during a charity event where Shanice tried to prove she deserved her new position. She arrived dazzling, smiling brightly, but the moment she stepped up to speak, the screen behind the stage abruptly flashed a series of images, old text messages, short audio clips, and an account chart connected to Ted. No one had time to process everything, but everyone understood one thing: this wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate strike. The room froze solid. Shanice felt the blood drain from her face. Ted felt his heart being crushed. Nicole stood at the edge of the crowd, unblinking, as if she were watching a performance whose script she had already read. Those images didn't just hint at professional misconduct, they hinted at an old, filthy story Ted had believed he had buried. Ted had no way out. He saw his future collapsing in real time, his reputation destroyed, his medical license facing investigation, the hospital turning its back on him, and Fairmont Crest ready to grind him down like a man who no longer held value. Shanice had no way out either. If Ted fell, she fell too, because she had tied her fate to his name. But instead of standing together against the attacker, Shanice and Ted started blaming each other with pure survival instinct. And that was exactly what doomed them. When people are too busy betraying each other, they lose all strength to fight the real enemy. Nicole wasn't the one who leaked it, but Nicole didn't stop it either. She watched Ted crumble and felt one part of her satisfied, but another part ached because Ted had still once been the man she loved. That conflict made Nicole even more dangerous, because she began acting not only with logic, but with deeply wounded emotion. She wanted revenge, yet she also wanted Ted to understand he had been the one to kill the best part of his own life. Nicole quietly reached out to people who could trace the origin of the leaked materials, and the deeper she dug, the more she realized someone else was playing a much bigger game, someone who didn't just want Ted ruined, but wanted to use Ted as a domino to bring down everyone connected to him. Meanwhile, Shanice slipped into something close to paranoia. She trusted no one, not even herself. She clung to Ted like someone terrified of losing everything, while simultaneously resenting him for the weakness that made them vulnerable to attack. Shanice couldn't bear being viewed as an opportunist. She couldn't bear watching Fairmont Crest, the place she thought would lift her up, now turning to stare at her like a joke. Her rage curdled into cruelty, into reckless decisions. She demanded Ted prove he chose her, as if love could be measured by the amount of destruction a man was willing to commit. Ted faced a brutal choice: hold on to Shanice and accept being controlled, or let go and face collapse alone. But letting go meant Shanice could unleash her final secret, the one she had never fully used, because it was the card that would break Ted in the most hopeless way. Loss became undeniable when Ted realized he hadn't only lost Nicole, he was losing himself. Colleagues who once respected him began keeping their distance. Patients who once trusted him began questioning him with frightened eyes. Ted felt stripped naked in public, and the humiliation ignited his anger. But he couldn't rage at the invisible attacker. The closest target was Shanice, and Shanice, instead of shrinking, exploded because she was suffering too. She suffered from being treated like a tool, from staking her entire life on a man who couldn't love her honestly, and from realizing the world would now remember her only as the wife of a scandal. That pain twisted Shanice into someone willing to drag Ted into hell with her. Nicole didn't escape loss either. She thought she had prepared herself to lose Ted, but watching him destroyed like this made her feel as if her own past was being smeared in filth. Nicole began to understand this marriage wasn't just a love story, it was a battlefield, and if she refused to step onto it, she would become the next victim. Nicole decided she would release the truth at the right moment, but even she wasn't certain whether she was doing it to save Ted or to kill the last piece of him still living inside her heart. When all three were driven into a corner, the third pitch-black secret surfaced in the most unexpected way. The person behind the leaks wasn't targeting Ted, or Shanice, or Nicole alone. They were targeting the power the three of them represented. An anonymous figure sent one more data package to Nicole, and inside was something that turned her blood cold. Proof that this wedding was only the visible tip of a much larger scheme, one where Ted was forced to serve as a shield, Shanice was used as bait, and Nicole was marked as the final target. Nicole realized if she released the truth too soon, she would accelerate the machine of destruction, but if she didn't, Ted would be crushed before she could stop it. This was no longer about who won or lost. This was about who survived. And so Fairmont Crest entered a phase where every polished surface began to crack. Ted stood on the edge of losing his career, his reputation, even the ability to look at himself in the mirror. Shanice stood on the edge of losing the power she had just seized, losing the control she depended on, losing the very image of herself she had fought to create. And Nicole stood on the edge of being dragged into a war filthier than she ever expected, where her cold authority might not be enough to protect her from a knife in the back. In the final moment of that spiraling chaos, Ted received a short message with no explanation, only a photo taken from above. Shanice standing beside an unfamiliar man in the hospital parking lot, and the man holding the exact same envelope that had been sent to Ted. Ted's heart dropped into an abyss, and Nicole, when she opened the last data package, found one sentence that left her frozen. "Don't mistake yourself for a spectator. You are the ending."